Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm Charles Laughlin. I'm the content director for BigFive Digital, and I'm joined today by two colleagues from Africa 118 and GeoPoll, and we're going to talk about the MSME Pulse survey, which is a really fascinating and I think groundbreaking survey about how small businesses have been impacted by the pandemic, how they're emerging from it, and what their future plans are based on the experiences they've had over the last couple of years. It's a lot of insights, actionable insights for those of you serving the African small business community. So first, before I introduce my fellow speakers, I just want to give you literally 30 seconds on what BigFive Digital is for those of you who are not familiar. We are a events and content business based in Cape Town, serving Africa, Middle East with live events, as well as podcasts, newsletters, and so on, other forms of content focused on digital transformation of small businesses in Africa and the Middle East. And our next live event is May 11th through the 13th in Cape Town, and we'll be actually discussing some of the things that we're discussing today at that event as well. So I want to get right into what we're talking about today. I want to introduce Ezana Raswork, who's CEO of Africa 118, and he's going to share a few thoughts on why we're here today and what this research is all about and what they were trying to learn. So Ezana, why don't you say a few words?
All right, Charles, thanks a lot for that. Hopefully you can hear me. Greetings from Addis. Essentially, we partnered with the GeoPoll team, and it's really to connect three dots. The first one is the need. In most of our countries, the top need is to create opportunities for youth, for jobs for youth. The second dot is that we know that SMEs are the primary job creators on the continent. Up to 80-90% of jobs are created by SMEs. And then the third dot is digitization. We know that small businesses that are online grow at a faster pace than those that are not. So, and sometimes those that could be up to 40% faster. So I think one of the things we tried to do, insights we want to gain, is how to connect youth, SMEs, digitization, and then how can we predict the future? So as John presents the survey findings, there's a couple of data points around optimism, the willingness or the expectation that an SME is going to be hiring over the next 30 days. So those kinds of things hopefully will help us to see, what is their mood and are they going to be creating jobs in the short term or in the near future? And hopefully this becomes a predictive tool. From our perspective, we're quite active in the SME digitization space. So you'll see on this slide here, we're in 5-6 countries now. We're a Google partner, so we've been doing, training hundreds of thousands of SMEs over the past few years, as well as helping them get onto Google with the Google business profile. And then we have more specific programs. We've partnered with the Norwegian Development Agency, as an example, around 3,000 SMEs that we want to nurture over 3 years to show how being online and having the right tools can grow. So we're very interested in seeing what's the ecosystem in which we're operating, and then sort of comparison to markets. So how does Kenya compare with Nigeria? And eventually we want to add Ethiopia and other markets and come up with a tool to help us see how SMEs are faring. So we're very excited about the results of the survey and wanted to pass it on to our colleagues at GeoPoll, John, to walk us through some of the things that we've learned, and hopefully we'll be able to see the insights evolve over time. So thanks a lot for hosting us, Charles, and over to you, John.
Thank you, Ezana. Thank you, Charles. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from Nairobi. John Murunga here. I work with GeoPoll as the Regional Director for Eastern Africa. I'm very pleased to present to you the results of this interesting survey that we did looking at the MSMEs, or the small, micro, small and medium enterprises 2 years into the pandemic. Just a few comments or thoughts around who GeoPoll is. For those who do not know, GeoPoll is the leading mobile research provider in the continent. We support brands, media agencies, international development organizations with research work across the continent. We've partnered with mobile network operators, and we have a database of over 270 million mobile subscribers With about over 80 employees across the globe, we are able to support clients with different needs. We run our studies in a multimodal format, both looking at ability to be able to do surveys remotely through platforms like mobile SMS, mobile web, and WhatsApp, telephonic interviews through different calling centers across the different countries that you operate in, mobile application for those respondents who've been able to download our mobile application that's available both on iOS and on Android. And then we're also able to support clients through your traditional face-to-face approach, where interviewers sit directly with respondents and get to interview them. But we incorporate the use of the mobile application during data collection to ensure that data that is collected gets back to our end as quickly as possible. I will now take you through the results of the survey that we did. This is the Africa MSME Pulse survey. A quick overview on the research design. So the study was done purely quantitatively. We used a structured questionnaire. The data collection methodology was telephonic. We utilized the Africa 118 MSME database. As Ezana had mentioned, this database covers multiple countries in the continent, but this survey specifically looked at Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. We did a total of 312 surveys. Sorry, a total sample of 312 MSMEs. We spoke to MSME owners cutting across multiple industries, including agribusiness, beauty, communications, construction, energy, financial services, food distribution, food production, healthcare, manufacturing, media and marketing, professional services, retail, technology, tourism, and transport. The study was done in December of last year. There are a couple of topics that we looked at into the survey. So the first one was looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the small businesses. Now, the pandemic has had a devastating effect on the continent, and a lot of studies have been done looking at how the pandemic has affected households and individuals. So this study wanted to take a look at the small businesses to see how much impact this survey had. And 75% of the sample respondents did mention to us that the pandemic had a negative impact on their businesses. This cut across all the three countries, with Kenya having as high as 81% of the respondents saying the pandemic affected their business negatively. South Africa recorded the lowest mark, but this was still high at 70% of the three countries. 6 out of 10 of all the SMEs surveys had to lay off, halt work, or reduce employees' salaries as a way of coping with the effects of the pandemic. And as we know, these MSMEs play a critical role in the economies of developing markets, and especially these three countries. In markets, for instance, as Kenya, over 80% of the workforce sits within this sector. So this move to lay off, halt work, or reduce employee salaries had a ripple effect across the entire country, looking at families and their livelihoods. So this was really devastating overall, looking at the pandemic. 70% of the SMEs were forced to shut down, at least temporarily, and only 17% have reopened at full capacity since the pandemic. Now, we know that the global supply chain was greatly disrupted as a result of COVID-19. And towards the end of 2021, this had eased a bit. However, when we did the survey, 41% of the SMEs did indicate that they were still having challenges receiving and supplying products over the last 30 days. So this indicates to us that the supply chain, even as things are coming back to normal slowly, is still being impacted by the pandemic. The second aspect that we looked at was the concept of working from home. Now, this is one of the things that came into prominence as a result of COVID-19. We remember, when the pandemic hit the continent and hit different countries, we went into lockdowns and people were being encouraged to work from home. So we looked at these aspects and compared, how different SMEs survived this. So before the pandemic, 44% of the SMEs say none or very few of their employees worked from home. But as a result of the pandemic, 41% say the employees switched to working from home all or part of the time. And 11% still have employees working from home all the time. Now, looking at some of the businesses that were actually established over the last 2 years, 6 out of 10 of those operate from home or entirely online. So this shows just how this phenomenon is changing within that space. And this, of course, will influence other aspects of business like emergence or high use of elements like e-commerce, because people are taking advantage of the situation and what it means to them in terms of how they run their business. And we'll see this in a few slides. We also looked at technology, and for this we wanted to understand how businesses have relied on technology over the last 2 years. Wanted to see if this has decreased, if this had stayed the same, or if this had increased. 72% of the sample respondents did indicate to us that their reliance on technology had increased over the last 2 years. And this was as high as 81%, for instance, in Nigeria. So we see how technology has become a crucial and an indispensable part of almost every kind of business. And this dependence, of course, has been largely accentuated by the pandemic. And further to this, we sought to find out what sort of technologies are they looking to invest in. And for this particular question, we did ask them which technologies they are looking to invest over in the next 90 days. Close to 40% of all the SMEs did mention website as the platform that they're looking to invest in. About a third mentioned hardware, and a quarter of them mentioned e-commerce, and these varied by country as well. So for instance, in Nigeria, 39% mentioned that we're looking to invest in e-commerce, just indicating how these businesses are trying to embrace technology and adapting to the times, and also trying to work around the challenging environment that came about as a result of the pandemic. Every business needs to communicate, needs to put out its services and products out there for customers to see. So we also sought to find out how currently these businesses engage in different marketing activities. Close to 80%, so 8 in 10 of the businesses use social networks as a way of marketing. 40% use search engines. A quarter of them use their own website, and only about 9% use traditional channels, that is, TV and radio, to do communication. This shows, the emergence and how strongly digital marketing is taking root within this space. And the high numbers of the use of social networks did cut across all sectors, and also did cut across all the 3 countries that we did the survey in. We stretched this further to ask them, how they expect their spending on the digital platforms to change in the next 12 months. Overwhelmingly, 71% of the sampled SMEs did, indicate that they are hoping to increase their spend within the digital platforms. So just showing that the direction they're taking with regards to digital marketing is within the digital space, and they're trying to take advantage of the platforms that are available to them. We then sought to find out how they do this, so how they go about doing their digital marketing in the digital space. A lot of them are using individual freelancers and also using their teams internally to do this. So 47.4% use individual freelancers, and 34% use their own teams internally. And we also saw a couple of changes on this when we look at the results by country. So for instance, when you look at countries like South Africa, the use of individual freelancers is way higher compared to, for instance, Kenya, where most of the businesses use their own teams to run their digital programs. Financing within the MSME space is always an interesting topic to look at, and so we also looked into that as well. And financing can be looked at in largely 4 buckets. So we can look at the sources of finance. We can look at the ease of getting finance. We can also look at aspects around access and the amount of financing that businesses are able to get. Specifically for this survey, we looked at the sources, and as we can see from the results, 3/4 of the MSMEs that we interviewed are self-financed, so they depend on the funds of the sole owners of the businesses. Closely followed, or a distant second, were 21% of the SMEs that said they got their financial support from family and friends. Only 11% mentioned that they were receiving financing from banks. So this shows the need to create opportunities for these MSMEs to get different sources of financing. And this can speak to some of the initiatives that are being put forward by government and other financial institutions, and it calls for this to even be enhanced further. Lastly, we sought to find out what sort of optimism and outlook the MSMEs had looking forward. So we looked at this from 2 different aspects. The first thing is we looked at how likely they are to hire or rehire staff in the next 3 months. Now, the likelihood of doing this varied by market, with the highest optimism being seen in Nigeria, where 1/3 of the businesses said at least they're very likely to hire or rehire staff in the next 3 months. The least optimism was expressed by businesses in South Africa, where half of them say they're not likely to hire in the next 3 months. And we went further to ask what their optimism was, looking at the conditions of their business operating environment. While there is some good level of optimism, with just about 1/4 of the MSMEs saying they're extremely optimistic with what the future looks like in the next 3 months. A substantial number of them are guarded. So they were sitting within the neutral space, and they are in that space where they're not very sure where the future lies, and in the next 3 months, and how that their business environment is going to look like. So we can overall say that the outlook is cautious in terms of what MSMEs are looking forward to, and there's a lot of work that needs to go into encouraging them to look forward to better times ahead, as we know this sector has a very important role to play within our different economies in the 3 countries. In summary, or in conclusion, the overall impact of the pandemic on the MSMEs was heavy, as we have seen. A lot of businesses were negatively affected. People were laid off. The business had to lay off some people. Some have not gone back to running at full capacity. Operations-wise, working from home has become an option, and a lot of businesses are currently entirely working from home or running online. And so this is something that we are going to see growing over the next couple of months and years ahead. Technology, there's a lot of reliance and adoption in the use of technology, and businesses are saying that that's the direction they're taking, and they're looking to even invest more within that space. Developing solutions for these MSMEs, supporting them with knowledge, with training, would be something that will be very helpful in the coming days. Marketing, as we have seen, is going digital. MSMEs are embracing, the use of digital platforms to do their marketing and their communication, and they are looking to even invest more within that space. Financing, though, remains a challenge. A lot of the MSMEs are self-financed, and opportunities for them to get funding easily, and of course at rates that are affordable to them, would definitely be welcome. And then lastly, the outlook is that of caution, but there is a segment that is quite optimistic, and they're looking forward to the business environment improving in the coming days. I'll pass the mic to Charles to take us to the next session of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was compact and very information-packed 20-minute presentation. But we wanted to go through it relatively quickly because we wanted to allow time for a discussion on sort of what this all means, what the implications of these findings. And just a couple housekeeping notes. Actually, could you go back one? I will make a quick note about our event coming up before we get into Q&A. Coming up May 11th through the 13th in Cape Town. BigFive25 is a discount code any of you can use if you want to attend the event. You can visit our website to learn more. That's all we'll say about that. So let's move into Q&A. Now you should have a Q&A button on your screen. If you want to enter a question, please do so, and we will entertain it as best we can. I also wanted to note that we have been recording this, and we will post a replay. I think it'll be on demand via Zoom. You should get some information on that post event, and then we'll also post it on the BigFive TV YouTube channel, which is where we publish our video version of our podcast and other content as well. So you'll get information on that. You will also have access to the slides. I believe you'll be sent a link to the slides after the event. So if anyone's question is, will I get the slides? That's the answer to that question. So let's get right into it. So I think a lot of my comments and or questions relate to sort of how we should read some of these findings. I mean, I'll give an example. 58% of the businesses formed in the last 2 years are operating virtually or fully online. And I guess, and maybe the data doesn't say this, but maybe we have some opinions on this. What does that say about the kinds of businesses that are being formed? Are more e-commerce based businesses, for example, being formed as a result of this, or are just more businesses that maybe have been the same businesses that were formed before, but they're operating differently? Do we have a sense of which it is? My sense is it's a bit of both, but I'd love to hear from you. John, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question there, Charles. And for me, I think it's a combination of both. And I think it's largely driven by the need for people to find different solutions to the challenges that COVID-19 brought to us. So when you look at the small, micro, medium enterprises space, a lot of the businesses that play within that space are micro, meaning that they have less than 10 employees. And you can imagine that this type of businesses, when COVID-19 hit, were the most affected. So what you find is that people will now look for alternative solutions to how they run their businesses, and this will drive them to the use of technology and take advantage of the e-commerce options and solutions that are found across different countries. So, for instance, if you look at countries say like Kenya, where you have the sort of like rider motorbike platforms that allow you to deliver goods and services, it would allow someone, for instance, who is in the clothing sector or the food sector to produce their stuff in the comfort of their home, and then utilize the networks that have already been created to get the businesses to the rightful customers, and of course utilizing social media to communicate the same and advertise in the process. Over to you, Charles.
Yeah, if you want anything, Ezana, otherwise I've got a few other questions lined up here. So the other thing that jumped out, well, there's several things jumped out of me, but one other thing that jumped out of me was this notion of the use of freelancers as basically as your marketing team, it's versus agencies or versus in-house staff. That number was pretty high. I'm not saying I'm sure I was surprised, but it was certainly notable. I think it was over 50%, if I'm not mistaken. my observation, and Ezana, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, is whether freelancers are maybe an overlooked channel for SaaS companies, for agencies and others who are trying to reach small businesses. You know, it could be any sort of solution that a small business needs to use, and that, you know, maybe there's an opportunity to leverage this freelancer community as a resource. Ezana, have you ever looked at that? Is that something that you think is feasible? Is it something that's being overlooked? Is it? Hang on one sec. We might have lost Ezana. No. Okay. Well, John, I don't know if you have any thought. I think Ezana's trying to get back on here. Anyway, oh, here we are. Ezana, you there?
Ezana is back.
Okay, sorry, everyone. Ezana, did you hear the question?
I'm not sure I like the question, which is why I dropped off. Now, could you repeat it, please?
That's okay. Well, there's more coming. The question was, I noted that the freelancer figure as being, you know, pretty prominent, pretty noticeable in terms of the number of people using, small businesses using freelancers as a digital marketing resource. And the question I threw out is, or comment question was, is this a potential resource for SaaS companies, for digital agencies, for others to become a channel into the small business? I don't know if this is something you've looked at, if that number stood out to you.
Yeah. So I think what's going to be interesting. Sorry, it looks like I'm having network issues. So can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're there.
Yeah. So I think what's going to be interesting is to see how that evolves over time. So what we've seen is that as the available solutions from a digital perspective evolve, that SMEs tend to fragment who they reach out to for what services. So it could be that I'm reaching out to a freelancer to help me with my social media, but I'm working with an agency for my website. So I think what we're going to see over time is that number is going to be shifting. The challenge is that in our markets, the quality of the freelancer is not necessarily, I guess, predictable. So oftentimes it would be, you know, my and they're available, they're good value, but maybe the quality might not be there. So I think what we'll do is see what evolves over time in terms of the market. But the expectation is that for some of these services, such as, you know, running ads and those things, that probably their agency segment, and that's what we believe, will probably increase over time, given the need for quality and for return.
Okay. So we have a question here. It's I'll just read it. It's the COVID-19 pandemic caught most MSMEs off guard, meaning we had no idea how to deal with such a crisis. That's certainly true. I would like to know, has a survey been done to establish the risk preparedness of MSMEs, to establish their capacity to respond to such a risk in the future? Additionally, are there organizations that build the capacity of MSMEs in risk management? I don't know if anyone has an answer to the second part of that, but John, I don't know if you've done, maybe in your other work, if you've done surveys along the lines of what's being asked here.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting question on risk preparedness for MSMEs, and no, we didn't cover it within the questionnaire, or basically the information areas for this survey, but it is an area that we will look into in our next wave of this survey, which we hope to do around, you know, the second half of this year. So this is something that we'll definitely check and then revert back in our next series of survey. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
If I may, I think I think that's the acceleration in interest in technology. I think it's partly a hedge for that. So as a lot of the businesses have looked, for example, at building websites, it's partly to keep operating despite any environmental circumstances. So I think that although I don't know, we have a clear answer to whether they're ready, but certainly I think the fact that they're shifting to digital platforms is one way of ensuring that they can continue to operate and reach their customers, you know, despite any environmental change. So I think there is part of the answer, I think, is there in what actions they've taken.
Well, and what they've been through already. I mean, having been through one crisis makes perhaps makes the next crisis easier. That may be, I'm not sure if that's axiomatic, but it certainly suggests, like you said, if someone, for example, on the payment side, if they've set up online payments and, contactless payments as a response to this crisis, that's one hurdle they won't have to jump over at the next crisis. The only issue is, will the next crisis require a whole different set of responses? It depends on the nature of the crisis, I suppose. Which we'll find out when the next one comes, and inevitably it will. So another thing that kind of jumped out for me was this notion of 71% planning to spend more on digital in the near term. That's a very promising figure. And I've always curious with these aspirational figures, how we should really interpret them. I mean, is there a discount factor we have to put on aspirational responses like that? So if I'm in the audience, how should I read that? Should I read that as incredibly optimistic or as modestly optimistic? Just kind of help calibrate how good a number that is. John, do you have a sense of that, or Ezana?
Yeah, I can speak to that from a numbers perspective, and I'm sure Ezana will speak to some of the support that they're already offering MSMEs within that space that indicates that this is just not an optimistic number, but it shows intent. Mm-hmm. And the way you look at these numbers is also to corroborate it with other elements within the survey that speak to the same subject matter. Mm-hmm. So when businesses are saying they're looking to invest in this, we should also look at what they are currently already utilizing. So they're already utilizing these platforms, and from the results, this cuts across a lot of the sectors that we surveyed. And when we see them saying that they are looking to invest in this in the current environment, it shows you directionally where they're looking to go. So there is a lot of, we can actually take this data and with a lot of confidence in terms of what these numbers are telling us. And I'm sure, as Ezana will mention, they're already supporting a lot of these SMEs with these solutions. So this is a direction that they're taking that we all need to look into very, very seriously. Over to you, Ezana.
Yeah, and we're certainly seeing it even at the level of, so we do a lot of training in partnership with Google. And what we see is that the attendance, the types of questions that we get at the SME training sessions have evolved. So certainly what we're seeing is an interest level that's gone up. I think the question around hedging against uncertainty is one answer to that. So the increase in technology. I think that, when you look at the survey in terms of how do SMEs spend their money, the fact that digital is up there, there's marketing spend before that would have been flyers. So I know when we started years ago, a lot of businesses would have little cards or flyers that they distribute. We don't see as much of that anymore. So there certainly has been a shift. We also see that even between markets, there is something happening in Nigeria. It does seem that in terms of optimism, we see the number of clients that are requesting profiles, the number of SMEs that are taking ad solutions has increased significantly as well. So certainly we were seeing that trend happening.
All right, I think Ezana's still having some network issues, but I think we got the gist of his response there. I want to kind of
just add something.
Oh, please go ahead.
There, Charles. Yes. Mm-hmm. So again, the other things that we also need to take into consideration is that a lot of these businesses service customers, and populations across the continent are telling us the same thing. So there is increase in the use of mobile phones within the continent. There is an increase in the penetration of smartphones across the continent. There is a lot of increase in the use of social media. So when you look at media consumption, we are seeing trends where people are moving away from traditional media to the digital space. So that is where consumers are. So businesses, again, because they are offering services and goods that are targeting these customers, have to also look within that space because that's where customers are currently sitting.
Right. Okay, we've got a audience question coming through. Why do you think e-commerce is a field that so many SMEs are getting so keen on at the moment? Zana's back if she wants to take that. I could offer a few thoughts as well. Zana, did you hear the question?
I was still on the last question around the increasing technology. Sorry about that.
Okay, so why do we think e-commerce is a field that so many SMEs are getting so keen on at the moment?
Yeah, no, we're certainly seeing an increase outside of just the e-commerce platforms. I think that there is more platforms available. I think that the value chain is being completed. So including more activity on the mobile payment side, more delivery companies that are available. So we see a lot of competition on that side. So I think there is an intensity around e-commerce that's increasing. And then obviously what we've seen is the user that wasn't there before. So I'm in Addis now, and ordering takeout food is something that 3-4 years ago was not part of the norm. So certainly the users is evolving. I think a lot of SMEs are users themselves, or consumers themselves, so they're seeing that evolution. However, what we find is that the interest level and the ability to follow through is not, there is a gap there. So the interest is there, but when it comes to actually being able to manage an e-commerce business, we tend to be quite cautious with the SMEs that we deal with to say, it's not just a window to a user. You do need to have the value chain combined, but certainly there's been a significant increase, which I think is a real one.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the one thing I've sort of observed, it's been a global phenomenon during COVID that small businesses, started adding e-commerce stores to their website or started doing something to sell products and services online. And I think the question I've always had, and I think it'd be interesting to maybe eventually be able to measure this, right now it's sort of anecdotal, is what of the percentage who sort of acquired e-commerce tools during the pandemic, what percentage 1 year later will be actively using? And I think that's an unanswered question at this point. I think that's inevitably a drop off. But the question is it like all these other accelerations that occurred during COVID? Will the line post pandemic, even after a drop off, still be higher than it was before the pandemic? And will the acceleration have been, by several years from what was anticipated before the pandemic? So I think you can have both a big acceleration in e-commerce adoption and also a big drop off from the adoption that was sort of reactive to the pandemic. So we'll see where those shake out, but I think we'll have a bigger e-commerce business at the other side of this, I think.
And actually, incidentally, on to your point, Charlie, I think that if you go back to your first question on the businesses that have started during the pandemic, that 58%. Interesting, those are the ones that are probably going to be the most successful because they started with an e-commerce mindset. They actually didn't have a shop. Exactly. They said, I want to, I have time, I need to make income. And we have some interesting in fashion that just started up from home. They're probably best set up because they actually started from the beginning.
Right. Well, digitally, it's a corny phrase now, digitally native, but kind of applies here. Okay, we have another question here. MSEs bore the brunt of COVID-19 with many closing down, downsizing, or reorganizing. We understand many businesses are trying to recoup lost fortunes. My question specifically addressed it to for Kenya regarding Kenyan SMMEs. How will general elections in Kenya in 3 months affect this recovery's journey? I'm probably unqualified to answer that one. So John, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you need to repeat the question?
Yeah, no, Kenya elections are something that I think every business is usually concerned about, and mainly because we are very passionate about how we do our elections. So a couple of months before elections, literally the country gets engulfed in the election cycle, and that also goes months after the election. It's very, very difficult to predict how the elections will go, but definitely it does slow down how businesses basically operate. A lot of the businesses take a very cautious approach in terms of how they go about their activities. We also see that if there is anything to do with very either before or after the election, then that of course also has an effect on businesses, especially the small businesses that can take a very bad hit with small incidences of, say, looting and stuff like that. So the hope is that we will have a peaceful election and we transition fairly smoothly, and that will help us to make sure that the period before and after elections is a lot smoother than what we have seen in the previous years. But it's very hard to know how things are going to go. One of the, I think, good things to tell specifically for Kenya, we going into an election year, was the last quarter of last year, we saw very strong economic growth. We hope that shows, for instance, in the first quarter of this year, so that at least when you look at it net in terms of how many quarters will see a slowdown, then that is limited to probably quarter 2 and quarter 3 of this year, and then probably we bounce back in quarter 4. So it's really a matter of hoping, and there's a lot of good communication, touch points that are coming in from the government and the people who are responsible, continuously assuring, investors, the larger development agency partners and the whole population that they're looking to make sure that the elections are done in a peaceful and fair way. So that should also, pass on that encouragement to the rest of the businesses. Lastly, we've seen a lift in COVID-19 measures within the country. Last week, the Minister for Health did lift the restrictions around how many people are able to congregate in a place, the use of masks. So that has, of course, also spurred growth generally within the market. So again, going into the electioneering period, unless we have another surge of COVID-19, these are elements that are likely to spur growth even in the as we go through or grapple with the challenges of elections, which I'm sure not very unique to us. Ezana can also talk to us about how—
I just touched wood when you mentioned another COVID surge. Ezana, let's broaden the question a little, maybe to sort of what actions can be taken now, I think, whether it's by governments or infrastructure or whatever it is, to sort of, help accelerate this recovery of small business.
A couple of things. One, just to build on what you mentioned, John. So I'm no election expert, that's for sure. And I think you're right. That it could be an election, or it could be other factors in terms of instability. I do think that one of the things that we can hopefully help to address with this survey is to have like an indicator that gives us a sense over time as to the level. So I'm not sure what to read into that, the actual numbers we have today in terms of, what Kenyan SMEs are saying. There's a cautious optimism, I think, is the way you phrased it, John, in terms of the conclusions. Certainly what we should be able to see is after 3 months, when we run the survey again, which direction is it going? And hopefully, at the end of the day, since it really is around, are they hiring or not? Are we creating, employment opportunities? Will the sense of optimism, translate into jobs or not? So I think that election question, I think, is a great one, and we should be able to see maybe in 3 months' time which way is the trend going. So I know what you mentioned, John, in terms of maybe the foreign investors are maybe a little bit more more nervous, I think, than probably local SMEs that maybe have maybe more resilience, but certainly we'll be able to see that. And then, Charles, to your question around sort of the environment, I do think that where we've seen tightening up is on the credit side, and essentially having access to financing, I think, was picked up by the survey, and I think is a challenge, especially with tightening of availability in emerging markets like Africa, whereas I think in the developed world there was availability to create a sort of value or create a sort of additional liquidity. I think it's more challenging in our market. So that's certainly one area I think that we've picked up that would help. And I'll just make one point, which is when we connect those two things together, that the access to financing being a way to weather the storm or to build back my business, connecting that with digitization. There's some interesting work around being able to look at the behavior of small businesses in terms of their transaction record. So that's where e-commerce or online visibility, if I can actually take a look at what is the trend on that side, maybe financial institutions, especially some of the fintech players, maybe they can take more risk because we may not have the financial records of this small business, but we do have a sense for the fact that they are growing or they're seeing a lot more customers. So maybe one of the ways to help free up capital for small businesses is by looking at their behavior, providing that data, obviously with their consent, so that they can demonstrate that, that they are seeing, that they are viable and growing and should be able to benefit from financing.
We're seeing a lot of creativity in how financing is being offered to small businesses. It doesn't seem to be showing up in the numbers when you see that most of them are still self-financed, and that's probably, it's going to take a while to chip away at that number, I think. But we're seeing things like usage-based financing for equipment and things like that. And I'm seeing recently about Move, which is a company in Nigeria that basically finances car purchases for ride-hailing drivers. Basically using the revenue they generate from their car going forward to pay off the financing. So I think it's just I'm always impressed by the creativity in the fintech community for figuring out how to use data that banks typically aren't either having access to or aren't interested in analyzing, and using that data to make lending decisions for small business. So I think we're going to see a lot more creativity going forward. I think one thing that we might be a concern is just looking at sort of macro trends in financing tech companies, whether what we're seeing sort of globally with interest rates and sort of a different mindset of investors around the metrics for the businesses they're funding, whether that's going to start to have a more risk-averse approach to investing in the next year or two. We'll see about that. I don't know if that's going to apply to Africa or not. So what I thought we could do is just to wrap up real quick. Ezana, you alluded to the survey coming up in 3 months' time, but could you just sort of summarize where this whole project goes, the two of you, kind of what's next for it?
I think we learn as we go. So I think we're connecting the dots. So certainly, I think I won't speak for the GeoPoll team, but we work very closely with them, and we've picked up some very interesting insights. And I think we haven't even finished digesting. So it's great that we have this opportunity just to chat and maybe answer some questions. But certainly, if over time we can put our pulse on the sentiment, the employment, the perspective of whether businesses are looking to create jobs, and then the role of technology in that, and then finance. I think that's sort of, we added that, but I think that's something that will gain over time. Hopefully this can become an indicator that people that are interested in this space, either banks, telcos, development agencies, anybody that's looking to service the SME space in Africa, looks at this as being an indicator for the way things are going. So in our conversation with GeoPoll is looking at this as being one data point, but probably the increased values to see where this goes over time. And then hopefully this ends up being a decision-making tool that will address maybe forward things like, what is the election looking like? We'll be able to go back and say, okay, what are small businesses thinking about, and then what can we sort of plan against? So, we're very excited to partner with the GeoPoll team and sort of carry this forward.
John, any final thoughts?
Absolutely. I just want to echo what Ezana said, and just to underscore that the MSME sector in the development countries, especially in Africa, plays a very, very critical role in the overall economies of these countries. And yes, we are very keen to continue to share information around how this sector is behaving. I know a lot of research has been done on the consumer side, so being able to connect the two dots will be quite critical. And yes, we'll be keen to continue partnering with Africa on an 8 on this. And yes, we look forward to the next session with you, Charles, as well.
Great. Same here. This has been very interesting. A lot of great data here. I think we're going to end it here. So I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank everyone who attended. Look for some communication following this about access to replay and access to the slides. We really thank you all for joining. Great conversation. And we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar, and hopefully seeing you at BigFive Summit in Cape Town in May. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks a lot. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.